Hello again, students. Welcome to our next document discussion about Module 7, The Road to Civil War. So we have three primary documents this time, so if you want to go ahead and get them out, we have Solomon Northrop, Harriet Jacobs, and George Fitzhugh. And I encourage you again to think of these documents as a unit, as a group, because they will all help you answer that question about what life is like for slaves in the Civil War. What life is like for slaves just before the Civil War. That's an important distinction. So first, let's talk about Solomon Northrop. Solomon Northrop, pretty famous individual. You might have heard of him before if you're a big movie fan. There's a book and a film called 12 Years a Slave. I encourage you to check that out. Sparks note it, if no other thing. Solomon Northrop, a free black man, one of the important few free black men in the North. He's from New York City, particularly. He's captured and sold into slavery for 12 years, and he does eventually escape with some help, but he escapes and earns his freedom again, goes back home to his family. But he spends 12 years as a slave in the South under a fake name. And again, think back to Venture Smith and Olaudah Equiano that we talked about earlier in the semester. The first thing he does when he earns his freedom is he writes a book, which is excerpted here. He writes a book, 12 Years a Slave, and tells about his experiences, tells his story, tells what slavery is like in the South, with the express purpose of trying to get the institution abolished. So that's an important thing to know about Solomon Northrop. So this particular scene that we've read in our document today is a slave auction. This happens relatively early in his story, where he is sold. And there's a lot of very specific examples that tell about how slaves are treated by white people in the South. So first of all, right there at the very beginning, that first paragraph, Mr. Theophilus Freeman, get it? He's funny. Partner of Mr. Birch, keeper of the slave pen in New Orleans, was out among his animals early in the morning. What is he talking about? Is he really talking about horses or cows or pig? Nope, my friends. He's talking about slaves. He's out among the slaves earlier. He bustles about in a very industrious manner, getting his property ready for the sales room. And how does he get that property ready for the sales room? What are these slaves required to do before they're sold? Right before they're sold, they are told to wash thoroughly, to shave. They're each given a new suit of clothes, cheap but clean, he says. They're lined up in order of heights. They are made to dance. Mr. Northrop is a violinist. He's a well-educated man. He's been a free man. He's a violinist. He's very good playing the fiddle. And so he plays the Virginia reel and the others dance. Why might Mr. Freeman want his slaves to do all of this stuff? Right. So that they sell for a higher price, right? Remember, it sounds sick to our 21st century minds, but at this time, these people are not people. They're property. So these animals, these pieces of property, were made to look very clean, made to look very healthy, made to look very lively and energetic, because if they're lively and energetic and healthy, then they can work. And it's really just that simple. Mr. Freeman is trying to make these slaves look like they are hard workers, like they're able to work all day from sunup to sundown, so that they will bring a higher price. He wants the money. What does he do? What does Mr. Freeman do once the potential buyers come in? What does he do to help his slaves sell for more money? Right, he talks about how good they are. He talks about what does Northrop say? Dwelling much length upon our several good points and qualities, makes us hold up our heads, makes us walk briskly back and forth, making customers feel of our hands and our arms like a horse jockey, Solomon Northup says. Remember, these people are not people at this time in history. These people aren't people. They're property. He says, Solomon Northup says, scars upon a slave's back were considered evidence of a rebellious or unruly spirit and hurt the sale. They're supposed to be meek and capable and relatively timid and not have gotten into any trouble previously. Ooh. Let's go to the end of the document and talk about these other figures, these besides Solomon Northup, these other characters who are being sold with him. He talks about Eliza and Randall. Now, who are Eliza and Randall? How are they related? What's their relationship? Right. Eliza is a woman. She has a daughter and her young son, Randall. Now, it doesn't really specifically say, but we're given to understand that Randall is very, very young. Her son is very, very young. And Eliza tries to influence her sale. What does she do? What does she say when a potential buyer is buying her and her daughter, but not Randall? Or the other way around. I take that back. When he's buying Randall, but not her. Right. She starts talking about, oh, I will work so hard for you. I will be the most loyal slave. You will never regret buying me. I'll do such good things for you if only you can buy me too. And this rich white boy says, no, sorry, I don't have the money to buy more than one slave. I'm just interested in the boy. What happens then? She starts crying. And she starts crying so much because she can't stop. Now, okay, as terrible as slavery was, as many rights as were taken away from these people, as many liberties as were taken away from these people, this might be the worst part about all of that. This might be the worst part about the institution of slavery, that something so basic as not knowing where your family is, something so basic as not being able to raise your own child, is taken away from these people. They don't have that right. And Solomon Northup talks very piteously about this scene. At the end, he says, what has become of the lad, God knows. I don't know what happened to him. It was a mournful scene indeed. I would have cried myself if I had dared. Why does Solomon Northup say that? Why didn't he dare to cry? Because what would have happened if he had cried? If he had let that get to him, if he had started crying, and if he had said something, some word of comfort to that poor woman, it would have gotten back on him. He would have been punished. He would have been beaten. He would have been hurt. He would have been starved. Something so basic as someone's humanity, something so basic as someone's feelings and emotions have been taken away. A terrible, terrible part of slavery. Let's talk about another terrible part of slavery. Our second document. This is worse. Our second document, Harriet Jacobs. Ooh, Harriet Jacobs. Okay, so a similar story in a way. Harriet Jacobs is a pseudonym. This is a fake name. She's a former slave. She earns her freedom, escapes, has freedom now. And again, the first thing she does when she gets her freedom is she starts talking and starts writing about her experience as a slave with the express purpose to get slavery abolished. And she has quite a story to tell, does she not? What has happened to Harriet Jacobs in her youth? She's been raped. Her story is by no means rare. This happened to a lot of slaves, female slaves, especially, not just female slaves. Oftentimes, the rite of passage for a white Southern man was to go with your dad, go down to the slave auction, and buy a female slave and rape her, and that made you a man. So why? I mean, why do all of these Southern white men want to rape their female slaves? Right, because if a slave has a baby, then that baby is a slave. Children follow the condition of the mother as the legal statute at the time. The legal set of laws in the South state that all children will follow the condition of the mother. Meaning, if your mother is free, you're free. If your mother is a slave, you're a slave. And there's nothing you can do about it, no matter who your father was. And that is the situation in which Harriet Jacobs finds herself. So, at the very beginning, she says, "My master was, to my knowledge, the father of 11 slaves." Why is the phrase "to my knowledge" significant? Because there's probably more. This man is going around raping his female slaves left, right, and center. She knows of 11 times that it's happened. There's probably more. There's probably more times. The second paragraph starts with the words, "My grandmother." My grandmother cannot avoid seeing things which excited her suspicions. She was uneasy about me. Okay, let's work through this here. Who is her grandmother? Now remember, Harriet Jacobs is a slave. But who is her grandmother? Her grandmother is her master's mother. Meaning her master is her father. So, okay. Her master is her father. Her master owns her. Her master rapes her. Her master is raping his daughter. And his mother, his white, wealthy grandmother, sees things that start to make her suspect that her son is raping his female slave, which just so happens to be his daughter. And she doesn't like it, and so she tries to buy Harriet Jacobs. She tries to buy Jacobs just to get her out, just to get her out of that situation. And what happens? The sale does not go through. The master says, "Hey, sorry, Mom, I can't sell Linda, Harriet Jacobs, because she doesn't belong to me. She's my daughter's property, and I have no legal right to sell her." Okay, so who owns Harriet Jacobs? The master's daughter, the master's white daughter, who is her half-sister. How might this make Harriet Jacobs' situation worse? Well, one, she can't get out. Here she has a chance to escape, to be bought by her wealthy white grandmother, and that isn't going to work. Secondly, it's probably very, very likely that the owner, the half-sister, sees what is happening just as easily as does everybody else, is very jealous, is very angry, and takes it all out on Harriet Jacobs, and Harriet Jacobs can't escape that situation either. So, okay, here she is being raped and molested and manipulated by her father/master, and here she is being punished in either very sly or very graphic ways by her half-sister/master. She can't win for losing. She can't get out. Towards the very end of that first page, Harriet Jacobs says, "I have myself known 2 Southern wives who exhorted their husbands to free those slaves towards whom they stood in a parental relation. These husbands blushed before the superior nobleness of their wives' natures." She says that there are a few, she doesn't say a lot, there are a few Southern women who see what's going on and don't like it, and get those young women out of that situation if they can. But in the preceding paragraph, she says most of the Southern women don't trouble themselves about it. They regard such children as property and marketable as pigs on the plantation. and thus get them out of their sight. The majority of Southern white women aren't bothered by this situation at all. Don't see any sort of sisterhood, and don't try to get those female slaves out of that situation because they're having babies and they can sell the babies and make money. And so it's not a problem. Life's hard. And some, if we want to link these two documents together, life's hard for slaves on the plantation. On a related note, our third document, George Fitzhugh argues that slavery is better than liberty and equality. So, okay, right there, I've given you a very easy to find thesis statement. This guy, George Fitzhugh, who is he? Right, he's a sociologist. Had to look how to say that. He's a sociologist. He's a very intellectual man. He's a very wealthy man. He's also a Southerner, and he also owns slaves. And these two facts are going to color how he thinks of his slaves. So he argues, as the title implies, that slavery is better than liberty. Now, how does that make any sense? Slavery better than liberty? He talks about, at the very beginning, other examples. He says the feudal system brought with it neither liberty nor equality. There were a bunch of poor people under feudalism. He talks about France and the northern states of the Union, the northern states in the United States have barely tried the experiment and have failed. The experiment has already failed, he says. We have conclusive proof that liberty and equality have not conduced to enhance the comfort or happiness of the people. What is he talking about there? What is happening in the northern states that he sees as not being liberty? Yeah, there's a lot of poor people in the northern states. We've talked we've talked a little bit about industrialization in the northern half of the country. People are moving to cities. Cities are very crowded. Cities are very dirty. There's a lot of corruption in politics in the north. And George Fitzhugh was able to point to all of that and say, see, liberty's not that great. On the other hand, George Fitzhugh says, here in the South, life is wonderful for everyone. At the bottom of the second paragraph, he says, his words, not mine, we do not set children and women free because they are not capable of taking care of themselves. To set them free would to give the lamb to the wolf to take care of. So he says that just as how we have to take care of women, just because we have to take care of children, because a child can't take care of itself. You know, a little 3-year-old running around, it doesn't know how to feed itself necessarily. It doesn't know how to clothe itself. It doesn't know how to work. It doesn't know how to make a budget and stick to it. It doesn't know how to save money. It doesn't know how to pay bills. There's a lot of life experience that it just hasn't had yet. It's not capable. Somebody needs to take care of that child. And at the end of the paragraph, he says, but half of mankind are but grown-up children. What's he mean there? Half of mankind, Black people, are but grown-up children, George Fitzhugh says. They need someone to take care of them. They can't handle liberty. Again, we think about our link to Thomas Jefferson several modules ago. This idea that African American people now can't handle liberty. So since these slaves can't handle liberty, since they need someone to take care of, the institution of the institution of slavery is good for them. Because they're given food, they're given clothes, they're given a modicum of health care, they're given a place to live, they're given a job, they get all these good things. So George Fitzhugh, to our 21st century brains, doesn't make a lot of sense. He leaves a lot of stuff out. But remember, he's a Southerner, and he sees things that are happening in the North as being very harmful. And those things just don't apply to people in the South. He says slavery is good for slaves because they're given all of these good things. They're given a job, they're given housing, they're given health care, they're given food and clothing and all of those things that they need to survive. They are taken care of because they can't take care of themselves. Thanks for nothing, George Fitzhugh. So, with that, we are finished with our discussion, and I will see you next time.